All right, there we go.
There we go.
All right. So, we're talking about how to be a discipler, and we're going to watch God be a discipler tonight. Here's a fun fact for you. In biblical history, there are 3 benchmark moments in God's relationship with humanity where he does things he's never done before. The first one that we're going to benchmark is when he establishes the law through a pair of relationships through Moses and Joshua. There is a second benchmark moment where he, through Elijah and Elisha, honors the law, where he calls Israel to take seriously the law given to them. And then, of course, with Jesus and the 12. It's interesting that in these 3 moments in history, these are the only times that God performed miracles through human instruments. Now God has performed miracles on his own, but when he uses someone of flesh and blood like you and me, these are the only 3 times he does that in biblical history. And each one of these times lasts about 70 years. And of course, with the exception of Jesus and the 12, at the end of their 70 years, it was just the launching point, baby. The church takes over after that. But in each one of these benchmark moments, they kind of end abruptly after 70 years, and each is marked with God walking with individuals who then pass it on to other individuals. So this pattern of discipleship is something that we can start to go, wow, there really is something to the way God has worked in history, worked in Jesus, and will work with us. So that's why I'm so excited about looking at this topic through these lenses. There is something special about when God walks with man that I want to highlight here tonight. Discipleship, has this thing, because we think of, kind of come follow me and I'll make you fishers of men, right? That's kind of our introduction to it. But I want to slow down for a moment and pause how when you look at Moses, when you look at Elijah, when you look at Jesus, there is always in every relationship an invitation. There is always an invitation. And with Moses, we see the invitation right at the burning of the bush. I kind of look at this invitation that God almost always has one of those I'm going to get your attention moments. I love how the Bible describes Moses. Moses is out there with the flocks in the field, and he sees a bush burning, but it's not burning up, and he goes, I will go over there and see this bush and why it does not burn up. And he has this kind of wow, that's weird, I'm gonna go check it out. But it's interesting that God always seems to do something like that, doesn't he? When he is about to move, he has this, I want to invite you in. I want you to come and witness a little bit of my majesty so that you know who it is that is inviting you. I mean, think about what we see Jesus doing, right? And if you have your mute off, if you could turn your mute on, that would be great. Think about that time with the miraculous catch. Think about that time when he was talking with Nathaniel and says, I saw you under the fig tree. Think about these moments where even as you look at Jesus, you could see that there is this kind of instance when God is trying to capture the attention of the one he is going to call and the one that he is going to commission. Even as you think about your own life, I think we've all had some sort of burning bush moment, some sort of divine relationship, some sort of question that was asked, something that kind of caught us off guard. I know for me, when I was first reached out to, I was reached out to by a couple of guys that I really wasn't that impressed with. When they reached out to me, I thought they were inviting me to their little youth group and they needed a cool guy to come and kind of help their group be a little bit more hip. And so I know, completely humble, right? And so, they kind of invite me out and they asked me to study the Bible. And so I'm in there, and and I'm looking at these little guys. I'm thinking they're kind of dweebish, they're kind of nerdy, they're kind of bookish, and I'm like, oh, I'm so not feeling them. And then we got on the topic of the sports we played in high school, and I told him that I had wrestled. And then the little guy, the one that was going to study with me, he goes, "Oh, I wrestled in high school too." And I went, what'd you wrestle, like 98 pounds? And he goes, "Yeah, how'd you know?" And I was like, "Well, you're kind of about that big." And I go, and he asked me, "Well, where did you wrestle?" And I said, "Well, I wrestled in Dallas." He goes, "That's funny. I live in Indiana, but I had a friend in high school who moved to Dallas." And I was like, "Oh, that's weird." He goes, "Yeah, but this guy was rocking a mullet. He was a little bit bigger than me, probably about half your size, but he was built like just a like a rock." And I went, "That's funny, because there was a guy at my high school who moved in, and he was quite muscular, and he had a mullet." And the guy who was studying the Bible with me said, "Oh, well, that can't be him, because this guy used to work with me after practice, and we would just be working on drills and shots, and he would take me to his house, and we worked out like with those old school sand weights, and it would just and he was just so awesome." And I was like, that is the weirdest thing, because the guy with the mullet and the muscles also would work with me after practice. And he invited me to his house, and he had those old school weights. And then we kind of both at the same time, like, you couldn't script this. We both at the same. And at that moment, I was like, I better pay attention to what God wants to tell me through these guys. At that point, I recognized I was not dealing with something human. There was something, because what are the odds, right? Well, think about your own calling. What are the odds that at the moment that you said yes, and I've talked to many people about this over the years. When you said yes, did you really even know what you were saying yes to? And most everyone goes, "No, I just said yes," and said, "Why did I do that?" I think it's because God, in the discipleship process, always has an invitation moment. And that invitation moment kind of has something that catches your attention. This is something that God does when he initiates a work in humankind. It is something that we are being asked, as Gordon Ferguson used to say, we are part of his co-mission, God working with us and through us to get the job done, because God is working. He gets your attention. So there's going to be a burning bush moment. And secondly, in the invitation stage, God always reveals the what. It's the objective. In Exodus 3, the objective that God gave Moses, right? "I have seen my people suffering and heard their cries. Now I am sending you." It's very clear that the purpose of this invitation is that there is a calling behind it. There is a purpose behind it. And that purpose is almost always bigger than the person. You know what I'm saying? It's almost always bigger than you. The objective that God is summoning us to is bigger than just our salvation. I mean, think about it. We see this in Jesus's ministry, right? Mark chapter 1, our scripture, verses 16 and 17. He's walking by the Sea of Galilee. He sees Simon and his brother Andrew casting the net into the lake, for they were fishermen. And what does he say? "Come follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." He always reveals the objective. He wants people to know that the call is not only a divine calling, he gets your attention, it's also a purpose calling. I want you to know right off the bat that I'm not just here to save you. I'm here to invite you to join me in blessing the rest of the world, and the calling that is going to create the change that everyone is looking for. But it's interesting that Jesus always had this kind of come and see. One of the things that I love about how John tells his gospel story, the Gospel of John, is that we're introduced to Jesus as he's being declared as the Lamb of God by John the Baptist, we see two unnamed disciples. We find out a little bit later who they are, but two unnamed disciples go up to Jesus. And the first things that Jesus says, the first words out of Jesus's mouth in the Gospel of John is, "What do you want?" Isn't that powerful? That God in the flesh, the Logos, the creator of all things, that everything was made through him and for him, and he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. The first words out of his mouth are, "What do you want? What are you seeking?" And then, of course, his response to the guys as they kind of fumble around and answer, "We just want to know where you are." Jesus gives that invitation, "Come and see." Discipleship doesn't just start after someone gets baptized. Most of the time, as we are out and about as followers of Christ, we are being asked to join in the work that God is doing to the rest of the world. He's inviting them. And one of our great functions as a church is that we get to play witness as we build these relationships with our friends, as we build these relationships with people that we're reaching out to. We get to kind of go, "Hey, that sounds a lot like something God would do for you. Hey, that seems like, it seems like there's something on your heart. Hey, you got into another fight with your spouse. Did she win again? Man, that's a pattern. Do you think God is trying to get your attention?" This is part of what we get to do because it's what happened to us, isn't it? When we were kind of at the point where we were ready to say yes, God was working in our lives, and then the purpose of why he was working in our lives gets revealed. "I want you to be my follower." And so it's this great invitation, and every single one of you said, "Yes, I'll do that." So what happens after that is something that we get a chance to kind of study out, is this phase of discipleship. There's three of them. There's invitation, there's apprenticeship, and then the last thing we're going to look at tonight is partnership. So I chose these words intentionally because they're powerful words and they're very clear. Apprenticeship. Apprenticeship is what we see in the Gospels when Jesus is walking on the shore, right? You have James and John, they're in their boat with their father Zebedee. You know why they were in their boat and Simon and Andrew were not? Is because James and John at that moment weren't ready to handle their own boat. They were being mentored, apprenticed by their dad. This is how every family passed on the family business back then. This is how it always gets passed on naturally. Apprenticeship is a natural part of every new venture. I mean, let's say, someone got a job, one of our teenagers kind of turns 18 and he gets a job at Jiffy Lube. Once he gets a job at Jiffy Lube, they're not just going to say, "Now, boy, get in there and change some oil." What are they going to do? They're going to give him a special name tag that says apprentice or trainee, and they're going to say, "Hi, this is Tom. This is Tom, and he's the trainee. He's going to learn how to take your order." Or, "Hey, listen, we're actually going to work our trainee Tom through it, but don't worry, he's being supervised right down there." And we'd say, "Oh, great, Tom's got a job. He's being taught how to do the trade." And apprenticeship is one of those things we expect that. We know that it's necessary, right? And so this is not just a cultural thing. Everyone of all time, in order to get a job done, has to have a phase in which they're trained, in which they are shown. Certainly Moses had that. As we kind of pick up the story in Exodus chapter 3, Moses has got all sorts of issues with God, doesn't he? Like, he's just not a very certain man. And I'm not gonna, I don't have time to kind of tell you the whole story, but you know how it starts to work out. Moses is there, he's called, he's summoned, he's told that God has heard the cries of his people in Israel, and now he's sending Moses back. And of course, Moses balks. He is confused. And God goes, don't worry, I am with you. I will show you. I will strike Egypt and they will let you go. He literally starts modeling what he has in mind. You know, as the training of Moses goes on, he is going to pick it up with kind of having Moses right there, kind of going miracle after miracle after miracle, showing to him, not just what was coming, but even through the bush, God was modeling the objective. Because think about it, the burning bush is more than just to get your attention. It's to teach you what walking with God is like. I mean, think about it. The bush is on fire, but it's not burning up. I mean, as preachers, we look at that scene and we can start thinking of sermon series, that just kind of comes to mind. Oh yeah, we are on fire for God, but we're not burning up. We will never be extinguished. I could burn forever. I want to be so on fire for the word of God that people just come to watch me burn. Just that whole fire and yeah. But what God was doing in that miracle was demonstrating to Moses, when you answer this call, you're going to face trials, you're going to face hardship, but I assure you, I promise you, you will not burn up. I am going with you. I will be there with you. And of course, we get the ultimate guarantee that the very thing that lit the bush on fire and the very thing that kept it from burning up, that spirit is going to live inside of us. But it's interesting that God uses these material things to demonstrate to Moses that with him, the call is high and the call is hard, but you will not be overcome. Think about what Jesus modeled for them. Especially I love the story as it's told in Mark. I mean, they walk into the first synagogue, Jesus is there, and then a demon comes out. I mean, how long had that demon been there in the synagogue and never had an issue? And then all of a sudden Jesus shows up, and this guy that might have been a pillar in the synagogue, kind of, just crazy. Jesus was modeling his power, his control, guys, there is going to be opposition, but trust me, when you're with me, you're not going to fail. You're not going to burn up. God has always modeled the objective. And so what that means for us as modern day followers is that as God models it and we imitate, it's important that we share the struggles and the challenges that God is helping us to overcome and work through. People need to see people that are zealous for him, that are on fire for him, that are kind of getting it rekindled again. People need to see that when you do it with God and you rely on God and not on human effort, but just in following the pattern, you're always going to find yourself refreshed and renewed. It is that important. And of course, I love how God in Exodus chapter 4, kind of deals with Moses's apprehension, right? The apprenticeship stage is kind of twofold. You get a chance to kind of have the objective modeled for you, but you also get a chance to have your objections answered. Because I think in apprenticeship, when we're really mentoring something, when we're being trained, objectives and honest dialogue have to be a part of it. Moses almost seems like he is constantly whining and trying to talk God out of his decision. And of course, what God does is so merciful. I love how Exodus chapter 4 starts. Moses is kind of like, why me, Lord? And God's like, what's in your hand? And Moses goes, a stick. And God says, throw your stick down. And Moses throws the stick down and it becomes a snake. And then God says, now pick the stick up. And of course, Moses is like, I'm not sure I want to pick up a snake, but he picks up the snake, and then it becomes a stick again. And what God is doing is that he's starting to meet Moses where he's at, and he's starting to help him kind of deal with the fact you're not dealing with some sort of human entity that you're going to have to overpower Pharaoh. I'm going to overpower Pharaoh. Now, let me reinforce this. Stick your hand in your robe. And so Moses sticks his hand in his robe. Now pull it out. He pulls it out, and it's leprous. And Moses freaks out. And then, now put it back in, and Moses does, and now pull it out, and it's better again. What was God doing? God was demonstrating that not only is he with Moses, but all of his apprehensions aren't applicable. You think it's about you. I assure you, it is not. You think this is about your skill and your ability. I want to reassure you that it's not. This is my plan, not yours. This is my calling, not yours. This is my commission. And when I do something, I will provide the power for it to get done. I think that is so important, because we come out of an apprehensive time when we don't want anyone to cajole or control us anymore. And I say, good. Let's not use fear and guilt as the motivators. God never does. Well, what should propel us? What should compel us to join God in this endeavor? Man, it is the amazing amount of love and grace we've experienced. I mean, for some of us who have been around, we still here. We somehow made it. We don't deserve it, but here we are. So what is God wanting us to do? He's like going, listen, guys, it's not about having to learn new tricks of the trade. It is simply about imitating the pattern. I'm calling you because my people are imprisoned. They're enslaved to sin. I want to send you back out. Trust me, I'm already working on them. I'm getting their attention. I'm clarifying the objective. They gotta have something more than just what they're living for. There is a holy discontent in our culture right now. That is the work of God. And so what do we need? We need to gain that opportunity and kind of invite them into this apprenticeship where we can reassure them that there is a God who is with them, who is calling them, who is summoning them, and that God is going to overcome the obstacles with you and through you. And I think that's important, because apprenticeship is all about this incredible time when we learn. We see that in the Gospels, don't we? There's that great scene where, John's disciples were baptizing and Jesus and his disciples were baptizing. But John immediately says, but it was not Jesus who was baptizing. It was his disciples. Did we need that extra detail? Yeah, we did, because Jesus had modeled, and now he was giving them the opportunity to participate and to join him in that endeavor. This is how God has always worked. This is how God works with us. And I think those of us who've been around for a while, we know the difference. It seems like when we were young Christians, didn't it always seem like God gave us a clear sign of what his will for us was? And then as we got older, we were kind of like, God, tell me your will. Should I take this job or this job? And there is just silence. What is going on there? What is happening? Why doesn't God just give a kind of, God, which job do you want me to take? And God's like going, I trust you. You're not an apprentice anymore. You're growing past this stage. Why don't you make a decision? I'll just go with you. It'll be okay. I mean, because think about it. Let's go to Tom at Jiffy Lube again. How would you feel if, when you took your car in, Tom, the trainee, was there being shown how to change the oil, and then 3,000 to 5,000 miles later, you go back to that same Jiffy Lube and there's Tom again, and he still has that trainee badge on. And you kind of like, man, it's been months. And then you kind of start to assume some things. Well, maybe changing oil is harder than I thought. Maybe Tom's special. Maybe he needs a little extra time. I don't know. But then after 3,000 to 5,000 miles later, now it's almost been a year, you go into that Jiffy Room and there's there's Tom again, still as a trainee. We would assume two things. There's either something wrong with Tom or there's something wrong with Jiffy Lube, because no one should take that much time to be apprenticed, right? And I think that's kind of the nature of discipleship, is that we are called to follow. And granted, we are commissioned out of Matthew 28 to teach them everything that, that he taught, everything that that I have commanded you. But there is this sense that there is a maturity, there is a growth pattern that should be set. That there is something that we are supposed to train in and with one another to get us past this apprenticeship point. Which is why, and you see with Moses and you see with the Gospels, they always are told, or God has the student participate in the objective. He always has the student participate in the objective. The stick, the hand, Moses is sent out, Aaron is sent with him. He is shown time and time again, but God has Moses participate. Don't just watch. You need to get your hands dirty. Don't just sit on the side. You need to start leading this Bible study. Don't just kind of go, well, I wish someone would come and do it. Here, do this with God, but with others that could show you. We have to have this part of discipleship as the norm, because there's invitation, there's apprenticeship, but then lastly, here's, how great was that movie, right? There is that time when God wants to work wonders, but he wants to work wonders with you and through you. And then, of course, I love this point, partnership. Luke 5:7 is one of those easy scriptures to just overlook, but I want to read it to you. I want you to hear how Luke describes this. This is I'm going to start up in verse 6. It says, when they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. So they signaled to their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and filled both boats so full that they began to sink. It's an interesting thing that in the first century, that you have people being trained. You have Zebedee training his boys, James and John. But then when Simon and Andrew start to catch those fish, they signal to their partners. Great word, because it kind of shows a little bit about the vision God has for us and him, the vision that Jesus had with the guys that he was reaching out to, that there was something already built in, because apprenticeship should end at some point. Well, what happens after apprenticeship? Well, here you have partnership. And this little scene in Luke kind of gives you what would have been their cultural norm when Jesus walked the earth, that you get trained for a little while and then you kind of graduate into the sense of, okay, now you know what to do. Now you get to be on your own. So Simon and Andrew were in a boat, Zebedee, James and John were in a boat. Eventually, James and John would have their own boat. Zebedee would have a boat. You see how the boats are starting to multiply, the catch, the family business is starting to grow, because there is this natural thing. You're going to be trained. You're going to be shown. It's going to be modeled. You're going to participate while you're learning. But man, there is going to come a time when you need to get in your own boat and you need to fish. We need to be partners. How you do affects how I do. How I do affects how you do. You have a great day. We all have a great day. You have a bad day. Well, we all have a bad day if no one else caught anything. We're in this together. We are partners in this business. This is what it's all about. This would have been the natural understanding of this discipleship relationship, not only in the time of Jesus, but even in the time of Moses. It would have been the natural relationship in the time of Abraham. This is how you passed on the family business. And I love this because if we can learn to add partnership to our apprenticeship, if we can kind of have this vision of what it means to be maturing in the faith, and that we could start to relate to one another as partners in the gospel, we will start to see this multiplication of boats. Assuming to go with the fisherman analogy, there would be all these multiplying things as we mentor, as we disciple one another, as we graduate one another out of apprenticeship into partnership. Let's kind of let the story kind of go. In the courts of Pharaoh, Moses shows up. And of course, Yul Brynner persecutes Charlton Heston to death in this movie. It's awesome. But here we have this incredible scene where God has now prepped Moses. And now Moses is standing before Pharaoh. And one interesting side note about this, a lot of people are confused about the method in which God tried to reach out to Pharaoh. See, Pharaoh was thought of as a god. In fact, he was the one that Egypt believed the gods appointed and empowered to keep order. The gods weren't the ones that kept everything in line. They were not the ones that kept the Nile from turning into blood. That was Pharaoh's job. The gods weren't the ones that were going to keep all the frogs and the gnats and all of the boils. That was Pharaoh's job. Pharaoh was thought of as, I am the empowerment of the gods that keeps everything flowing, that keeps all the livestock living, that keeps all the Nile in their floodgates. He thought this, my role is to keep control. And so what you see God doing through Moses is that he keeps over and over and over again showing Pharaoh, you are not in control. He tries to get his attention, doesn't he? He tries to invite him in. The objective, Pharaoh, is that you're going to learn to let go of the people you're oppressing. And of course, Pharaoh had some issues with that. And so God kept addressing it time and time and time again. And so I think that's important as you kind of look back on that narrative, not to get freaked out about, well, what is God doing? God is speaking the divine language that they understood. God was speaking a language that every Egyptian would go, oh, wow, there is a God, and he's not Pharaoh. There is a God that has power. We know it's not Moses because that dude's a Yahoo, but his God is the one true God. And so that is why even as they left Egypt, there were some Egyptians that went with them. Isn't that amazing? So here we have Moses confronting Pharaoh. And Moses, as God told him, you said, you will be like a God to him. You see the discipling? God is now sharing the stage with his student. God is empowering Moses to experience this as one who now shares the goal. And this is a beautiful, beautiful initiation. Again, one of the last thing that you see God start to do with Moses is that God allows Moses to perform all the miracles. God allows Moses to be the man with the stick who is going to part the Red Sea. God allows Moses. Now, God is doing it all, but God allows him to be clearly seen that this is my representative. This is my guy. This is who I am choosing to work through. He stands aside as you perform the objective. And really that is an amazing, amazing moment. Because I want us to think, is there a moment in time when Jesus graduates his disciples? Can you think of one? I want us to kind of spend some time dwelling on that. Because one of my favorite scenes, and this really kind of changed my life, is that scene in John 15 at the Last Supper discourse. When Jesus is literally kind of getting his guys ready. Listen to the words that Jesus uses. He tells them not to worry because in my Father's house there are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you. I am going there to prepare a place for you, and when I do, or if I do, I will come back to take you to be with me where I am. This is marriage language for a first century young man, for a first century Jew. Every single person in this group would have heard this before, but they would have heard it at the engagement party, because the way marriage kind of happened, you would find a family who had a son and another family who had a daughter. I have all daughters, so eventually some dad would kind of go, hey, those Molden girls are pretty awesome, they're God-fearing, they would be a great match for my son. So they would initiate a time, and the two families would get together. And when those families got together, eventually at some part in the meal, the son would get up with a chalice, would walk over to one of my girls and say, I am going to back to my dad's house, and I'm going to make a room for us. And when I finish, I will come back to gather you, to take you to be with me, and we can start a family. And then he would hand her the cup. And if she took the cup and drank, it's on. They are engaged. There is going to be a wedding. It's party time. Hopefully he's a strapping young man who knows how to build. So that's how it works. Those words that Jesus uses in chapter 14 are words they would have known. But look at what he does here in chapter 15 in verse 9. He says, as the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Now remain in my love. If you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept the Father's commands and remain in his love. I have told you this so that my joy will be in you and your joy will be complete. My command is this: love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. Now listen to what Jesus says here. I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends. For everything that I learned from my Father, I've made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you that you might go bear fruit that will last, so that whatever you ask in the name of my Father my Father will give you. This is my command, love one another. Do you hear it? Do you hear the graduation talk? He says, listen, up until now, you guys have just been my servants. Of course they have. Jesus comes into the city, right? He tells a couple of his guys, hey, listen, I want you to go. There's going to be a donkey. I want you to steal the donkey. You want us to steal the donkey? Yeah, steal the donkey. And if someone says, hey, why are you stealing this donkey? You tell them the master needs it. Now go. And then he tells a couple other guys, hey, listen, there's going to be a woman who's going to have a pot on her head. I know there's a lot of women with pots on their heads, but you're going to follow that woman. She's going to lead you to an upper room. You're going to say to the master of that room, I need to prepare my master's meal so he can celebrate the Passover. That's what they did. They were servants until this moment. At this moment, the dynamic of the relationship changes. This is graduation. Love has none greater than this, that a man laid down his life for his friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. And of course, we're going to do what he commands because we love him. I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. A servant just does what he's told, but you know the business. It's time for you guys to get ready to have your own boat. Instead, I have called you friends. Okay, so now this term, friends, is a powerful term. Because it's not just like, yeah, you're my boy, you're my, you're my guy. What he's literally saying, remember the wedding language? This is the same term that John used for himself when he said the friend of the bridegroom. Now that the bridegroom has come, the friend of the bridegroom is filled with joy. He literally was saying, you guys, and using wedding language, you guys are my best men. You're my friends. Because the way those two dads got together for that love connection was that the groom and the father would always send a friend ahead of them to come to a dad like me with daughters and say, hey, I'm here representing this family. They would like to know if you would be open to their son marrying your oldest daughter. And the friend was the representative. So how he conducted himself, how he carried himself would reflect on the groom. That was part of the role of being the friend. You are my friends. He's saying, listen, from now on, I'm going to send you ahead out to the people to see if there's going to be a love connection. One of the other roles that a friend of the bridegroom had was that he protected the reputation of the groom and the bride. Once those two got engaged and the girl took a sip of the cup, the friends of the bridegroom would then, it was their responsibility that if anyone had anything negative to say about the groom, or if anyone brought any ill repute about the bride, it would be the friends who would go and investigate and deal with it. Right? I mean, it is that. I mean, when you graduate from apprenticeship, how do you know when you're no longer an apprentice? You become a partner. You become a friend of the bridegroom. You become the one that kind of shows up to church and says, how's the bride looking? What are they saying about her? I want to be a representative of the groom and the dad, but man, I am going to protect the reputation and the purity and the beauty of the bride. And we do this naturally, don't we? I remember this one great story. It's not a story, it's actually happening. We had, every small church has kingdom princesses, the ones that have grown up in the church, or that special sister that got converted and overcame a lot. And church princesses, that's just what they are. Everyone in the church adores them. Well, while we were in Albuquerque, one of the church princesses, fell in love with her handsome prince, and it was awesome. I was doing the wedding ceremony and I literally had the best view in the house. It's awesome. We were there in this beautiful golf course clubhouse. We put an arch up and it was just gorgeous. And the bride came down, everyone was crying, the groom was crying. My daughters were the flower girls, so I was crying because they were dressed in white, and I thought, oh my goodness, this is my future. So everyone's crying, and then the bride comes down and she kind of walks up to the dad hands her off. She walks up to stand underneath the arch, and as she does, her headpiece that held her veil got caught on the arch. And she was like stuck. Like there was no wedging her out. And it was funny how everyone in the wedding party responded. The guys started going, hey, let's take apart the arch. The girls pulled out all of this weaponry, hair dryers and picks, and it's like they were in their bridesmaid dresses. Where were they hiding all this stuff? But it was there. Everyone knew the bride had to look beautiful. That's the way we do it. We would never let a bride kind of walk down an aisle with something on her dress, right? We would never let a bride kind of have some sort of stain, some sort of mustard on her face. We would never let a bride do that. Well, someone who is really going to take on this mantle, this maturing kind of role in the church as a partner, as a friend of the bridegroom, he's going to be the type of person or the type of sister who is going to say, how is the bride looking today? You can tell who they are. They're the ones on the call right now going, who's not here? Who needs to hear this? They're thinking like a friend of the bridegroom. They're thinking, oh, this would be so good for so-and-so as he's reaching out to them. Or I'm going to follow up with that person over there because I want the bride to be beautiful. The church is God's bride. And when we mature, when we start to kind of graduate into this partnership with God, you're no longer servants. You don't need to be told what to do. You are now my friends. You know the master's business. Well, what does that love for the master, what does that knowledge of the business do? It makes you into a best man for the greatest wedding of all time, Jesus to the church. And of course, there is a third role that the friends of the bridegroom got to play, and that was the celebration of the nuptials. They were the party boys. You know, they were the reasons why the 10 virgins heard the groom coming. Because what would happen is that these young men, once the engagement happened, it was construction time. You know, the guys would go work a full day, and then after a full day of work, they would start building on their dad's house. They are building that room. They are laying brick. They are putting mortar. They are trying to create a new wing to the house they grew up in. Because what it took was, in order to get your bride, you had to build a place for her to live. And so that groom was working into the night. Those little candles that they had, they were all over the place. He would work himself to death, go to sleep, wake up early, go to work, try to get a catch, as soon as the day was done, go back to work. He was building the room. And then eventually, when the dad felt like this is worthy to bring a bride home to, he said, son, go get your girl. And so the son would go get his boys and say, it's time. And the boy's job was to kind of go, woo, baby, let's go get your girl, son. Come on now. Woo! I mean, they were charged. It was their cultural expectation that we are going to celebrate the time when the groom comes. And boy, isn't that what we're all waiting for? Man, we want Jesus to come. We want Jesus to kind of get down here. We want that day to happen soon. But listen, the goal isn't to just sit around waiting to be told what to do. The goal is that we are supposed to disciple one another, kind of give people that vision, like God walked with Moses to the point where there's this interesting scene with God and Moses in Exodus 32. You remember the scene where God's like, hey man, let's just start over. I'll just build a new nation through you. And Moses goes, whoa, God, you can't destroy these people. If you do that, everyone will say, man, the God brought them out just so he would destroy them. That can't happen to you. You can't be seen as a God that can't work with the people that he delivers. Why would you do that? God, don't destroy them. And it's almost as if God was going, see, I knew you were my friend. I knew it because you were more concerned about my rep than the hassle that these people are. It's such an awesome, awesome scene, but that is partnership. And of course, partnership with God, Jesus gives us this term. It's being a friend, but not just any old friend, like functioning like the best man in a first century wedding. I'm going to initiate the love connection. Hey, do you think there's a chance that you would be interested in getting to know my groom? God's already working. God is already trying to get their attention and kind of clarify the objective. There's something more for your life. There's something more than this. God is already working. And when we play this role, this glorious role, this John the Baptist quality role, where we get to kind of go into people's lives and say, hey, I'm trying to bring you to the groom. And then when we get taught how to do it, when we get taught how to walk with people and care for them and love them and show them Jesus and model that, it's almost like when God was working with Moses and showing him how he was going to confront Pharaoh and not get burned up. Moses, you're going to do it. Jesus does it with his apostles. And then Jesus is going to do it with us too. We need one another to model, to teach, to show. But at some point, we have got to mature to the point where we start thinking like the bridegroom's friends. I'm going to initiate. I'm going to reach out. I'm going to protect the dignity of the bride and protect the dignity of the groom. because partnership means he trusts you, the student, to take charge. He's empowered you. He's blessed you. And we know that in the end, when we receive the Holy Spirit, we have someone that is going to convict the world, help us, assist us. Jesus says, I am going to go with you. But the goal of discipleship isn't just to kind of teach them to obey everything, kind of like we have understood it in the past, but to teach them to obey so that they go from apprenticeship to partnership. And next week, we'll start to drill down a little bit more on what that looks like. So that's all I got for you tonight.